Hi, everybody. I hope you have a great morning. I have my colleagues here with me, and we're going to talk a little bit more about who they are and introduce ourselves. So thank you for sharing our session today. So we're going to talk a little bit about, a really exciting, I think, a very important topic in Asia today, about how work is transformed, in particular due to the pandemic. But we're also going to share with you some key takeaways that we have from Catalyst, a global research report that we've done over the last couple of years. And we've done some really amazing insights that we gathered from our 2020 research. And we'd like to talk a little bit more about this. So let's go to the next slide. So I'm Jacqueline. I'm a partner with Profit. I'm based out of the Singapore office. Been in the industry for the last 20 or 30 years, just telling my colleagues about, how old I am today. But the truth is, we've seen a lot of transformation over the years, and I think we are in a times where we have never seen before. COVID has changed a lot of things, and I think today's topic is really apt for us to hear a little bit more about how we believe the post kind of a COVID is going to transform the way we work. Tony, over to you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. My name is Tony Frost, and I co-lead our organization and culture practice here at Profit with my partner, Helen Rosethorn, in the UK. I've spent the last 25 years looking after transformations in corporations of all sizes and have primarily led digital and cultural transformations, as well as transformations centered around customer centricity and innovation. I'll turn it over to you, Amanda.
Great. Hello, everyone. I'm Amanda Bala. I'm an associate partner with Profit, joining you this morning from New York. And in addition to my role on Profit's organization and culture leadership team, I also have had the pleasure of co-authoring the last few years of our Catalyst Global Culture Research. So I'm excited to talk to you today around what this idea of Catalyst means and how it really applies to the future of work. And over to Erin.
And good morning, good evening from New York, where I'm calling in from. So Erin Meyer is an engagement manager out of our New York office. I helped lead the 2020 Catalyst research and report writing this year. And in addition to that, I've been involved, with Tony and Amanda and several other of our organization and culture practice leaders over the years, leading projects mostly centered around culture change, as well as helping to lead another global culture study in the last year or so. My hope is to share both findings from Catalyst with you today, but also some learnings from other research that we've helped conduct.
So just before we start the session, just a little bit about Profit. For those who are familiar with us, Profit is a consulting company of about 600 people. We have 12 offices around the world. And what we do, quite a fair bit of things that Tony has shared a little bit, Amanda and Erin, is that we do a lot of work helping clients navigate through the uncommon growth using transformation as a way to look at whether it's through the brand, through the innovation, customer, or even culture. And I think there's a lot of things that we do that has seen, I would say, the signs of the times of disruption has already started before pandemic. And then what we have seen in the last 2 years has accelerated a lot of this. And I think in Asia in particular, and what we saw in Southeast Asia in particular, we saw an unprecedented way of people becoming and using digital for the first time. We have about 600 million people in Southeast Asia. And the truth is almost half of the people do not use internet, right? I mean, they are still using, analog and digital in a very different way. And in the last 18 months, that has changed tremendously. People were forced to learn to use digital. Companies are changing the way they work. And this is something that has become something for us to look at in the way we need to look at how we organize the business, how we organize the way we actually work, and how we actually organize the way we can go to market. So at Profit, we're helping clients over the years to look at ways to transform, especially using the organizing culture as a way to think about things in 4 levers, right? In this case, in culture, we often ask clients these questions, right? How do we define and harness compelling purpose to drive performance? And how do we develop a culture that we can thrive on change? In particular, how can we build and sustain capabilities in a digital world? And how might we transform our organization to power growth? And today, what we're going to do is we're going to share with you some of our learnings from our research and how we've used culture as a catalyst to actually lead transformation. And this has become even more important than ever. We will also look at the external forces and the future of work. And then importantly, we'll look at how we can build a resilience and how we look at fitness of change at the end of the session. And obviously we will have time for Q&A as well. And hopefully throughout the whole session, you guys can just chime in and ask any questions and we'll try to talk about it. So if you look at your dashboard at the bottom, you'll see a little button called Q&A. And this is where you could, feel free to drop in all of your questions and then we'll collate it. We'll try to answer it along the way or towards the end of the session. So let's maybe just talk a little bit about who we have on the call today. We're going to do a little bit of a poll. We know, from the attendance list, we have a lot of people from different sectors and different practice. So we're going to pop up a little poll. If you can, just tell us, which area of the business unit you're in, and then we can understand a little bit more about the audience. Hamza, would you pull up the poll? It'd be great if you can tell us a little bit more about yourself. So just select one that's most appropriate. Okay, we'll close the poll now and let's see who we have. So we see a mix of different people. Okay. So my colleagues is going to talk a little bit more about, the framework we use at Profit and how we drive change and transformation, the human-centered catalyst model that we use quite a fair bit. And we know for a fact that in Asia in particular, culture has never really been the forefront of transformation for many reasons that most companies here in Asia look at top line growth and product and services as the main driver of change. And they try to drive the top line growth, and that's what they drive through a lot. But in the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen that companies are struggling a little bit because of digital transformation. Companies are trying to struggle and use tech as a means to actually lead change. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. Some companies try to use innovation and disruption as a way to actually lead change. And again, some companies struggles, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But culture in particular is a very sensitive topic in Asia because, how do you manage people? And in a very different culture due to a religion and due to the language and the barriers of how we actually set up organization in Asia, it can really not be very consistent. So we're going to share a little bit about how we use culture as a catalyst to be able to look at transformation in a way that can drive growth in a meaningful manner.
Great, I'll pick up from here. Thanks, Jacqueline. So if we can move to the next page. So Jacqueline spoke earlier about the transformation work that we do with our clients. And she also just mentioned sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And so oftentimes when we're brought in to work with clients, it's because they're seeing that their transformation efforts are struggling to gain traction. And as we've observed this, we tend to see some different patterns in terms of why that might be. Companies rushing to find what looks to be a simple solution. If we can only get the technology right, or if we switch to this new thing and overemphasis on what's new versus maybe what we've been doing before. We also tend to see underinvestment in really aligning leadership, and in particular, middle management, which we know is such a critical audience, but it can be a very large one that's difficult to engage. And so sometimes organizations might perceive it as just too difficult. And then sometimes an overfixation in terms of focusing in on trying to get through barriers and challenges, rather than trying to create moments to really celebrate the progress being made along the way. So these are some of the different issues, and unfortunately that leads to a whole host of concerns as it relates to the way employees, the way leaders are really experiencing transformation. And unfortunately, the desirable outcome that nothing changes. And so this really sparked our interest in figuring out, if we can move to the next page, how do we really get past these challenges and help enable successful transformation? And so at Profit, we've developed a model that really grounds all of our organization and culture work and our thinking. It's what we call our human-centered transformation model. And it's based on this idea that organizations are made up of many humans. So therefore, like a human, organizations have DNA, they have a soul, they have a mind, and they have a body. So if you look at the DNA, that really is what makes up the core of who your organization is. It's your purpose, your values, your business, your brand strategy. This really sets the direction of travel for the change that needs to happen. The soul, this is really all about what are the mindsets and behaviors that are required to drive change? And then how do we build into the day-to-day work environment through things like stories, symbols, rituals to really help ignite belief in employees around that change. From a mind standpoint, this is really where we supercharge the workforce. So we think about what are the new capabilities required to drive change, and are we needing to find new ways to attract, develop, retain the talent that has those capabilities? And then within the body, this is all about the operating model, the processes and the systems and tools that are needed to really organize and direct employees along the change. And so all of these elements need to work in sync with one another. Collectively, they comprise your culture. And if you're looking to make a change, you need to have these elements working together to really drive that change. So we set out over the past few years in what we've called our Global Catalyst series of research to really figure out what this human-centered transformation model looks like in practice. And the first thing that we focused on in 2019 is going out to a global sample of transformation leaders, asking them, what are the key levers of culture that for you have really helped drive change? And this is what we call our catalysts. We identified 11 levers in total, 6 of which are fundamentals and 5 of which are accelerators. And these span the different areas of the human-centered transformation model. So the fundamentals, this is what you absolutely must do in order to transform. These are things like aligning leadership, developing a clear roadmap and KPIs. And then the accelerators can be used in combination with the fundamentals in order to do exactly what the name says, to accelerate the change. So for instance, selecting one here, you can see setting a powerful, actionable ambition. If you combine that with the idea of developing a clear roadmap, you can see how that roadmap might create greater clarity and really ignite greater belief among employees. That was the focus of the 2019 research, and that's where the idea of catalysts really took shape. And it resonated very well with our clients and with the other companies that we speak with, but we tended to get 2 questions about the 2019 research, which helped shape what we wanted to learn in 2020. One question was, we've now kind of narrowed down to 11 levers of change, but this can still feel like a lot. Where do we really start? And then the second one was, what do these things look like in practice? What does it mean to have an actionable roadmap? And so we set out in 2020 to really create more of a playbook for how leaders could put these levers into action within their companies. And coming out of that, we defined 4 different pathways of change, each of which represented one different way that organizations could focus to really jumpstart their transformation. And we helped them think about which of these is right for your organization. It's based on the primary cultural roadblock that you're trying to overcome. So for instance, organizations that struggle with lack of clarity, this might be where around the organization you hear things like, our leaders aren't aligned on where we're heading, or our employees don't know where we're going. If you're facing that lack of clarity, our 2020 research would have helped you understand that you should start by defining the transformation, which would mean setting a powerful, actionable ambition and really focusing on leadership alignment. So that was 2020. And now in this year's research, 2021, which we're going to focus on tonight, we wanted to continue building on these learnings around the levers, the human-centered transformation model, but clearly 2020 was a year that none of us would have expected. And so it felt really important in 2021 to explore the human-centered transformation model in the context of all of the different forces that came into play in 2020 and understand what the implications might be. So we set out to answer 3 questions this year. The first one was, if we think about the societal forces that really accelerated in 2020, so things like remote work, diversity, equity, and inclusion, sustainability, which of these do leaders expect are going to be more enduring going forward into the future, and therefore will create or need to create sustained cultural change within organizations? The second question related to, what does it then really take for organizations to be fit for this change? We know a lot of organizations, coming out of this period that we've been in, are really thinking about how can we be more resilient and truly learn from the changes that we've already made. And then the third, taking this idea of change fitness, would be linking that into how do we take change fitness and really make that work in favor of a successful and lasting transformation. So these 3 questions were the focus of this year's research, and I will turn it over to Erin to tell you a little bit about the methodology and then to get into some of the findings.
Great, thank you, Amanda, for sharing results from our poll. So just a quick note on methodology, and then we'll jump into what we learned this year. But just wanted to share that our Catalyst research, as we've mentioned a couple of times, is global. And we use a mix of qualitative and quantitative methodology. So we start with, this year we had just over 30 interviews with executives across the world. And so we were able to capture a wider net than the 4 markets you see here on the screen. Whereas our quantitative research, fielded in March or April of this year, hit 4 key markets, including China as sort of the representation of the Asian markets, which we were able to dig a little bit more deeply into through our interviews. And so building off the research questions that Amanda shared, we have 3 primary findings, and this is how we'll organize the rest of our time together today. So the first finding is really about, beyond learning what these external forces that Amanda had started talking about and Jacqueline shared as well, beyond acknowledging that they're quite impactful in driving cultural change, we've actually found that leaders believe these forces are going to continue to increase in importance over the next 3 years, and they're not, here today, gone tomorrow. The second finding is that cultural change, successful cultural change, in the last year was less about being able to respond to a single force at a time really well, and it was more about being able to absorb multiple significant forces at one time. And so we're really excited to introduce our change fitness model, which helps push beyond sort of traditional change management theory and build on this idea of how might you build organizational resilience from the inside out. And thirdly, we uncovered the business outcomes and actual financial benefits of committing to increasing change fitness. So while that might be a great return, we also were able to understand what are the top drivers that organizations should pursue in order to see an increase in their change fitness. And you'll see those fundamentals and accelerators come back up in this year's research in that point. So let's unpack these external forces quickly and then talk about where leaders need to focus as we move forward. So to briefly set some context, what you're not seeing on the page here is that leaders reported remote working, employee well-being and mental health, and the economic slowdown as the top 3 most influential forces in driving change last year. We might not find that entirely surprising. In China, the #1 factor was actually the economic slowdown. But here we are, a year and change later, and we see that these 6 forces listed on the right have fundamentally shifted the landscape. And what's interesting, and what we'll talk about here, is that these forces are expected to continue. And the graph shown on this page here is saying that, the majority of respondents believe that those top 3 forces that really drove change in 2020 are only going to increase. And actually, these numbers are larger in our China market, with over 85% of respondents believing that those top 3 forces are going to increase in importance over the next 3 years. And what's interesting is as we look across these forces, we're not just talking about a digital transformation. That was certainly new and challenging this year, but it's more like remote work and climate change, sustainability, social justice activism, all of those gaining momentum that are going to continue to impact people and organizations as a result for years to come. So we asked leaders to think about what might need to be true about their organization moving forward. And we uncovered these three future areas of focus, if you will, that will help organizations become fit for this future of work. And they are about conscious commitment, empowering talent experiences, and dynamic ways of working. Over the next couple of pages, we'll dig into each one individually. So the first about making conscious commitments. So what we've seen here is the growing importance of organizations needing to focus on and be accountable to multiple stakeholder groups. And this is particularly resonant in Chinese respondents, noting that, moving forward, it's going to be increasingly important for organizations to meet the needs of all stakeholders in their ecosystem. It's not just about delivering profit or dividends for, shareholders and owners. And globally, we saw that DE&I and well-being and mental health and sustainability were all sort of required to become central to how organizations are going to operate moving forward. And this focus and dedication that many companies sort of committed to over the last year are becoming the new table stakes and the expectation of employees moving forward, that's going to continue to be central and focus. And so noting that our research was conducted, sort of in spring of last year, we wanted to continue to keep a pulse on, what else is being written and studied in the last few months. And so we're peppering in a few additional, research studies and interviews that we've conducted since. And on the theme of conscious commitment, I think there's been several pieces written, what's being referred to as the Great Resignation, where data is showing large percentages of employees have either left or are strongly considering leaving their companies. And a particular study reveals that actually company culture and purpose is the #1 driver in leaving a job in this post-pandemic world. And so what we're seeing more and more is that employees are thinking critically about why they're doing the work that they are. And they're placing a newfound importance on the company's values and specifically what those values mean for them as an individual. And if there's a connective tissue that's lacking or entirely missing between what my company believes and what I believe, I am now more likely as an employee to seek a fresh start. So the second focus area is about empowering talent experiences. And this is where we see the need to create really relevant and valuable employee experiences that evolve over time and help promote and enable greater well-being and productivity. And in our research, we found that this is enabled by primarily three things. The first is increased flexibility in where, how, and when work is completed. The second is creating mechanisms to give greater autonomy to teams and individuals. And the third is investing in employee upskilling and reskilling for these new work environments. And this third piece is particularly resonant with our Chinese audiences. So with some supplemental research, when we think about promoting greater employee well-being and productivity, we see that flexibility and learning are central to how employees are thinking about their future. So the stat at left shows that both HR directors and individual employees understand that agile learning and tools to enable that are really critical in attracting and retaining the best talent. And I think what's so interesting, I'm going to focus a little bit on the quote at right by Satya Nadella at Microsoft, is, productivity had certainly been defined as task efficiency, I think, before 2020. And now we need to sort of redefine and rethink what productivity means in a post-pandemic world and include collaboration, learning opportunities, career trajectory, well-being, autonomy, all of those notions in the idea of was it a productive day or not. And thirdly, we focus on dynamic ways of working. And this one's interesting because it's all about finding ways to bring the benefits of a digital work environment to life as we move beyond sort of what was referred to as the global work from home experiment. And so I think some of the benefits that we heard in our research of the digital work environment was reduced hierarchical behavior, so increased interaction across levels, people being more accessible, feeling more prepared to pivot and change business models in future times of crises. And so this is all about, being dynamic. And so what does that actually look like? If we add some research, we see and acknowledge that, the work from home experiment, if you will, didn't force 100% of all workers everywhere to be remote 100% of the time. There were certainly companies operating with a more hybrid model. And so as we emerge from the challenge of 2020, I think what we see is that the traditional business models are no longer sustainable. And that's sort of supported by this stat at left, right? But employees want the best of both worlds. They want both increased flexibility and autonomy and choice and more digital interaction. And there are also a large majority of employees who are craving more in-person collaboration and co-working. And so while this transition to remote work, happened overnight, I think the response was, let's use digital as a Band-Aid or just a temporary solution so that we can get back to normal. And what this future area of focus is all about is thinking critically about where digital can be used because it's better or more efficient or more productive than in-person collaboration. And so this is what leaders get to sort of work through to understand how can we be more fit for this future environment. And so with that, I'll let Amanda share a little bit about our perspective on how we can execute on these 3 areas of focus with the idea of what we're calling fitness for change.
Great, thanks, Erin. So before we get into the idea of change fitness, as we spoke about earlier, sometimes we know that barriers can get in the way of the change that organizations are looking to make. So we did some research on this as well, but before we share the findings of the research, we'd love to hear from you through another poll. What is the key barrier that you believe is holding your organization back from culture change? So you should have just seen the poll question pop up. Again, the question is, what is the biggest barrier to culture change you plus your organization is facing today? And we have 5 options for you to choose from: lack of cross-functional coordination, lack of understanding the need for managing organizational change, lack of leadership alignment, overemphasis on technology as the solution rather than the role of people, and lack of connection between individual change initiatives and broader strategic goals. So these are 5, and if you see another really key barrier within your organization, we invite you to select that and please share in the chat. We'd love to hear if your organization is facing other barriers. So we'll give another moment or so for voting, entering into the chat, and then we will share the results.
I think even if you are not doing any change at this point in time, you probably anticipate a lot of challenges, and a lot of this poll questions will actually be relevant to you. And feel free to drop into the chat, any observations, comments.
All right, so why don't we go ahead and close the poll and share the results. Yes, I see the question in the chat. Is it possible to see the poll results? And here they are. Definitely quite mixed, but we see that the lack of connection between the individual change initiatives and the broader transformation objective, that appears to be the leading one. Overemphasis on technology, that was one that I mentioned earlier on. That definitely is an important one. And just overall, the fact that there is kind of this dispersion among the barriers, I think suggests that organizations are certainly facing a number of barriers when it comes to driving change. And so we really hope that the concept we'll speak about tonight in terms of change fitness is something that your organization finds really useful. So we'll go ahead and close the poll results and move forward. So in our research, we asked our respondents the same question that we just went through, and they could select all that apply. And so in this case, the question was, which of these factors do you believe will hold your organization back from change? And the 5 here, which are the same 5 that you all just voted on, were the ones that rose to the top globally. What was really interesting to us is actually the ones that fell to the bottom of the list. We tested about 15. These are the 5 that rose to the top. And the ones that we saw that fell to the bottom were really those that related more to the tactics of change. Things such as not having the tools or the methods that are needed to drive change. And if we look at the 5 that are here, the top 5 globally, to us, these really speak to the people dimension of change. Things like not aligning your leadership or the organization not really collaborating effectively together. We also took a look at the results for China, we saw some similarities and we saw a few differences. So Jacqueline, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think in China in particular, right? I mean, using looking at enterprise change has always been a little bit different due to the way the culture has evolved. And what we did see is that there is a few things that's different. I mean, lack of cross-functional coordination is the same problem as they see in China. Also, similarly, the overemphasis on technology is also emphasized as well. But what we also see in China was that people were yearning to understand what is the overarching view of that change, right? In terms of, and how do you prioritize it? How do you manage it? People still do not really understand how that's driving the change. And the other thing that we saw quite a fair bit in China is that when change happened, they're unclear about who's accountable, right? Who drives that change, and then who owns the outcome. I mean, this is something that is quite different in China as opposed to the global research. And finally, I think in China, a lot of things is all about measurement. People like to know, right? How do we measure success? How do we know what is successful? And there's a very narrow way of measuring success in China, the way they see it. And in that sense, they feel that, are we driving change just because we're ticking the box, or are we creating real value for the organization? So that's fundamentally quite interesting that we saw as a difference between China and global.
Thanks, Jacqueline. So to me, one of the key themes that emerges across these barriers is really that human dimension, and it reinforces a belief that we've had within our practice, which is that businesses don't change, it's humans who change, and then humans change the business. And so it's absolutely imperative for organizations to really help their employees adapt to the change. And when you consider the very dynamic environment that Aaron spoke about earlier, to us, that indicated that the traditional change management playbook is no longer sufficient and a new approach was needed. When we talk about traditional approaches to change management, these are ones that tend to view change as more of an obstacle or a single milestone to be achieved. You overcome it, you complete it, you check the box, you're done, and you go back to normal. And I think what we've all learned after the past 18 or more months is that there really is no such thing as normal anymore. And so certainly organizations did begin to evolve from this more transactional view of change to one that was more what we call transitional. So especially as companies began to get into digital transformation, they were really forced to look at change in a more multifaceted way, a more complex journey with multiple milestones. But if you think about the ongoing technological shifts, the macro forces that are still present in the environment, to us, this demands to go even a step further and a really transformational approach to change management. This is one where the organization really proactively takes on a growth mindset and is truly equipped to thrive on change. And so we set out in our research, if we can move to the next page, to develop and validate a model for what we're calling change fitness. And we thought about the idea of fitness because, like any muscle, the more you practice it, the better you get, the stronger you get. And so we hope that this is a model that will be useful to help your organization continue to practice and grow in terms of your change fitness. So overall, we've laid out 5 different levels, moving from that transactional to the more transformational side of the spectrum we just discussed. And we have 5 levels, starting with one where change is viewed as an obstacle on the left-hand side, and moving to the right-hand side where change is really viewed as play. The challenge of change is exciting. And so we'll talk through each of the 5 levels and what it looks like for your organization to ascend along each one. So at level 1, this is where change is seen as an obstacle. When new situations arise, they can be perceived as a threat and they create some anxiety. When we move to level 2, this is one where change is celebrated. And so there's a more positive orientation, but there's still kind of this lingering desire for things to get back to the way that they were. In level 3, this is where change fitness really begins to take shape. So this is one where organizations start to be more excited around transformation. They believe that there's something better at the end of the journey. It's one that brings growth and abundance. And also importantly here, this is really where we start to see organizations begin to take a more human-centered approach to change management. So thinking about those elements we discussed earlier, DNA, mind, body, and soul, leaders really start to become more intentional about these and how they apply them in order to drive change. At level 4, what we call flow, this is where, the pace of change starts to quicken and individuals move into more of a flow state. It's where their actions and their awareness of those actions are in sync, and the organization begins to feel like it has a really clear direction moving forward. And then finally, when we move to level 5, this is where change is almost like a sport. It feels like play. The organization has this growth mindset, and it's one where, the organization and the individuals within it are really thriving because the change is actually creating opportunities for us to excel both individually and collectively. So these are the 5 levels of change fitness, and each one of these has an imperative when it comes to the organization, leaders, teams, and individual contributors. So what this would say is that, this isn't just the work of leaders, or that change isn't something that can just get pushed down to individual contributors and expect them to really push forward on it. Change is something that really all different parts of the organization must be working together in sync to collectively drive the change. And so to that point, I'm going to turn it over to Tony, who's going to talk through each of these different imperatives in a bit more detail and give you some different ways and best practices that you can think about building change fitness within your organization.
Thanks, Amanda. In my remarks this morning, I'm going to focus on the highest levels of change fitness, where change is recognized initially not as an obstacle or a single milestone, but first as a journey, and then, as Amanda described, a process that offers opportunity for creating a state of flow, and finally, as a form of play. At the organizational level, companies at the highest levels of change fitness, the ones that truly thrive on change, all deeply embrace experimentation as a necessary precursor to innovation. Organizations with lower levels of change fitness tend to preemptively declare innovation. Don't bother me, I'm innovating over here. Organizations with a higher level of change fitness recognize innovation as the outcome of iterative experimentation. As our client Faye Whitmarsh, who's quoted over on the right side of the screen in the UK, said during her interview with us as we were doing the research here, they've recognized at the Nationwide Building Society the need to shift their culture to one that truly understands iterative experimentation as a core to part of their culture. Now, if we were to think about it one level down, this embrace of experimentation and innovation, this acceptance of volatility, uncertainty, change, and ambiguity has a direct implication for leaders. Leaders display change fitness by ceasing to focus on building kingdoms. They start focusing on building organizational capabilities instead, and enjoying the process of handing these capabilities off to others so that they can focus on what comes next. We love this quote from Molly Graham, who's worked for some of the most successful digitally native firms in the world, where she refers to this process as letting go of your Legos. She observed that leaders in high growth environments succeed because they're constantly finding new opportunities to build and create, and they do not associate success with constantly trying to grow headcount under their span of control. And personally, I've been enjoying observing one of the senior leaders in one of the largest healthcare companies in the world as they've been building out their commercialization capabilities, because they've been training leaders underneath them to manage all of the sub-functions. And I'm watching as they're actively preparing to hand off those sub-functions to other leaders so that they can move on to build something else as the organization grows. It's a great example of giving away your Legos. Now, at the team level, that's where things get really interesting, because teams are the heart of organizational work in the 21st century. However, teams used to be far less cross-functional than they are in organizations with high levels of change fitness. These firms have intensely cross-functional teams, and they universally work using agile principles. We see these highly cross-functional teams most often emerging first in the market-facing go-to-market functions. So their marketing, product development, product management, service, those are the areas where we see it happen initially. And those teams are self-managing, and they have a high level of decision rights within the team. For instance, product and service development teams have design, engineering, research, product management, and analytics and data science colleagues at the core of the team. And sometimes they also have dedicated legal, compliance, and marketing colleagues in the core team as well. In the US, and I'm located in New York, we often look at USAA Insurance as a great example of this kind of transformation because they moved far ahead of other organizations. So their operating model is now entirely focused on the journey of their members, who in this case are exclusively those who serve in the US Armed Forces or who served in the past. USAA has now aligned all of their front of house operations explicitly to the journey of those members so that the team can completely represent the products and services relevant to the member at that stage. So if you're being relocated from one place to another, you don't need to think about what are all the things that you might need. They can arrange a real estate agent to find you a new home. They can arrange insurance for your goods and belongings while they're in transition. They can help your kids find local schools. All of those things are aligned to that moment in the customer journey. Whereas in the past, they were all discrete products and you would have to talk to lots of different people and figure out for yourself what you might need. Finally, moving down to the level of the individual contributor, their shift at the highest level of change fitness is that they're no longer I-shaped, vertically focused talent. They proactively build fluency across multiple disciplines, which not only accelerates collaboration within those highly cross-functional teams in which they work, it also opens up more pathways for their development as they move into leadership roles. And frankly, it sets them up to give away their Legos when they're older. Firms who are looking to build change fitness are really well advised to broaden their thinking when they're hiring, to be seeking those who are displaying learning agility to grow within the firm. And that means focusing a lot more on potential to grow across disciplines versus only their ability to deliver near-term results within a single discipline or function. Lisa Rometty, who you see quoted on the right, she heads a significant division of one of the Fortune 5, and she shared with us that when she's hiring leaders, she's looking for demonstration of their learning agility throughout their career. That learning agility starts at the individual contributor level. So now we've moved through the model. Let's pull up our sites and talk about the greater implications of change fitness. So our 2021 research has revealed the fact that change fitness validates all of our human-centered transformation model because we see that the cultural levers of change, which we identified in our foundational research in 2019, show up as drivers of change fitness in 2021. In fact, the number one driver of change fitness is where we started with Amanda, setting a powerful, actionable, time-bound ambition that imagines the future. And in times of uncertainty, companies really need the clarity that a strong ambition brings. Also interesting is that the other three that pop up here are foundational levers. So anyone who's been engaged in larger transformational efforts would likely say that they see this reflected in their own experience. You have to get the fundamentals right. Additionally, our 2021 research demonstrated that organizations with higher change fitness are better able to drive higher volumes of transformational activity. And they're pulling levers from across the entire model, DNA, body, mind, and soul. Also, not surprisingly, activities focused on employee motivation and enablement were very, very important in 2020. Perhaps the most powerful finding from this year's research is that we saw that companies with higher levels of change fitness reported that their company's financial performance was at or better than expected in 2020. As a result of these findings, we believe that change fitness is strongly correlated to better organizational and financial performance, even in this period of tremendous turbulence. The bottom line is there's real benefit to developing higher change fitness and the resilience that comes with it. So, what might you want to do? Well, this points to a very clear path of action for companies to apply the levers of the human-centered transformation model to build their change fitness and overall resilience, and ultimately, and here's the kicker, improve their financial performance. You need to focus on a clear ambition, We have a clear point of view of what this needs to be, as I said before, specific, time-bound, measurable, and actionable, and linked to your company's roadmap. You need to approach change holistically. You can't just focus on one lane of the model. Higher change fitness requires all elements of the model. And finally, if you want to lay the foundation for greater maturity, the fundamentals are fundamental. They're critical. They are essential for change, and they're also relevant globally. So we've shared a lot in a very short period of time. So let's move to.
Yeah, and
yes,
I think a lot
please.
of these interesting findings that Tony just shared would sometimes come a little bit shocking to Asia, right? Because, you know, the truth is we have done all of this. How come change is still not happening, right? So a lot of times, as Tony shared in the chat earlier, there is a little bit of a struggle whereby we laid out the initiatives. We know the North Star we're supposed to go. How come things are not happening? So if you look at what Tony just mentioned, is that they need to be done holistically. And I think this is where the challenge is sometimes. Like, how do I do it holistically? How do I do it cross kind of like functional units, right? There's a little bit of, because this is very unusual in Asia, because a collaborative kind of a work style, it's always top down. That's always very common. Right? We're given a task, we complete it. You know, so the sense of agile is also very new, right? You know, how do I do it? Experimentation, embracing change, embracing failures. These are not something Asians are used to. It's like, if we don't do it right, we'll take 18 months to effect that change, right? It doesn't matter. We'll make sure they're successful. You know, can you talk a little bit more about, you know, that, Tony? About what you see in, you know, like the Western culture, embracing change and failures, as opposed to the Asian culture, whereby failure, it means it's, you know, we fail, right? And then we can't change, and then everybody is demoralized.
Yes. So I want to say that having worked in Japan, China, Singapore, India, I think that Asian cultures in generally constantly lie to themselves about themselves, because every Asian organization and every function within every Asian organization that I've ever worked with, and I've done a lot of work, particularly on innovation in Asia, they all start out by saying, oh, Tony, you need to understand, we are not innovative. We're not collaborative. And they tell all of these lies about themselves. And when you simply set up a framework and a leader says, we're going to move in this direction, all of a sudden, there's this blossoming of creativity they told me they would never have. And everybody loves to work with each other and support each other, and they're incredibly helpful. And so I understand that this is the stereotype, but I watch organizations constantly break that stereotype. And I think that it starts with leadership, in the sense that if there is permission and the leader is clear and lives up to their promise, that they will support a new way of working from the top, then magic happens. And I have seen it time and time again. And I've taught innovation in Japan and China and Singapore and India to large organizations. And every time I've had a senior leader who said, we're going to do it. And then everybody goes all in. And it's funny because my Asian clients have often thought that things like Lean Six Sigma would be really easy, that that's somehow more native. But the truth of the matter is, I've seen equal success with pattern breaking as I have with pattern optimizing. It simply requires the permission. That's my personal experience.
Amazing.
I would add one other. Oh, go ahead, Tony.
Please. No. I was going to change something. Finish it.
I was just going to add a perspective, actually, from the research that we conducted in 2020, where, I mean, globally, this idea of a fear of failure is something that resonates. Many more organizations say that they celebrate their successes and their lessons learned. But one of the ways that we found that organizations can really break through this is through that more structured approach to experimentation, which Tony talked about a little bit earlier. And I remember last year, that was something that we dug into in the research. And this idea of conducting test and learn experiments was something that China leaders said that they did far more often compared to the UK, the US, and Germany. And so in speaking with our colleagues in Asia around why that is, you know, they really pointed to the pace of change, the need for organizations to adapt very quickly. And so therefore, this kind of constant experimentation mode is something that can really help normalize failure, because there's a structured hypothesis, and it's either going to be proved or disproved. And if it's disproved, that's not viewed as a failure so much as, okay, the experiment didn't work. What can we learn and improve for next time, and then work that into the next experiment? So I really think this foundation of experimentation that we saw coming through in China in last year's research is definitely something to help break through maybe the cultural stigmas around the fear of failure.
Actually, that reminded me of a client in Vietnam, right? MB Bank of ours, where in the past, when it came to us to help them transform, over many different kind of tasks that they needed to transform, they were saying that we would take 3 years to do this. And we're saying that, why do you need to take 3 years, to reboot something? And we asked them to try that pilot of a test and learn that Amanda just mentioned. And then they were surprised that, that actually does work, right? Instead of doing something 18 months, it took us 3 months to experiment something. We rolled it out, we tested it. And they actually did it before the pandemic. So they were doing all this test and learn, trying to reboot the whole digital bank just before the pandemic. Nobody knew it's coming. And we successfully piloted a version just before pandemic. And amazingly, when that get rolled out during the pandemic, when it hits, their digital platform actually saves the bank in many ways, right? Instead of having lockdown and 0 customers and acquired customers, they were able to acquire, because of the test and learn format and that quick collaboration across all the business unit, they garnered 2 million new customers in 6 months during pandemic, which is unprecedented, because in 25 years, they only have 5 million customers before. So suddenly in 6 months, because of this, change, fit for change that Tony mentioned, this thing about trying to be more agile and more collaborative and accepting failure. And then that was quite amazing to see. And now we're seeing this kind of a rolling thunder kind of like spirit, right? They continue the evolution. And then to date, they acquired, more than 5 million customers, even during the pandemic. So really quite amazing. So there's some questions. So maybe I'm going to try to my expert panelists, with regards to how do you adopt dress for your day across the world and in Asia? Do you think that's will become something more prominent in Asia? I'm not familiar with that, actually. I'm not sure what that is. But, so maybe Tony and Amanda might know that a little bit more.
I was going to hand that over to you. Yes. So my answer is I think so. And the reason is that a lot of the firms that started that, well, first of all, we have to recognize that globally in the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of CEO transitions in large multinational firms. So I'll choose Pfizer as an example. So Albert Bourla succeeded Ian Reed as an example. And Albert announced Dress for Your Day fairly quickly after he took his role. We've seen that happen in other large global firms as well. So I expect that is not only, first of all, it was happening just before the pandemic. And I think that now that there's been so much remote work, that a lot of the norms have been broken. And Magda, you might be interested to see, we wrote a piece about 10 months ago now called The Slingshot Effect. And one of the things that we talked about in that piece was that we saw opportunities across the human-centered transformation model to accelerate changes that probably a lot of organizations were ready to do, but for whatever reason they deferred. And I would put things like Dress for Your Day very much in that category. I think we're seeing a lot more talent centricity in global multinational firms. And I think that that's a component of it. It's not surprising to me that Asia is hesitant to adopt this, but I suspect that it will make its way through because so many multinational firms are doing it and they're all in Asia. And so gradually, the fact that all the other markets are doing it, I think will begin to make change there as well. That would be my guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tony's totally right. Yeah, Amanda, go ahead.
I was just going to share one more story because it's one of my favorites that I've heard, but Mary Barra, who's now the CEO of General Motors, GM, she came up, first she was their chief people officer running HR, and when she stepped into the role, she definitely saw a lot of cultural challenges that she wanted to push through, moving too slowly, kind of hesitancy to really make decisions, some finger pointing. And so one of the things she observed was that they had literally like a 10-page dress code for, all different situations and scenarios. And so she changed the dress code to 2 words, which was dress appropriately. And at first there was a lot of, outcry over this and will people know how to, show up in meetings with their customers. But it really was a very powerful, going back to the idea of DNA, mind, body, and soul. We talk about symbols within the soul, and that idea of taking a 10-page policy manual and entrusting the adults within the organization to make decisions around how they could personally dress was a symbol of, we are expecting you to, make decisions, truly own them going forward. And if we can, if you can be trusted to do this, then you should be able to make these other types of decisions too. So I always love that example.
Yeah, I think that's something, like Tony and yourself hit it right, because in Asia, you will probably see a lot of companies still even have uniforms, right? Because to them, that's unity, right? But then I think in this age of transformation where we need to recognize diversity, we need to recognize the kind of the unique personality that we bring to the table, that actually brings a whole new game to the entire way we think about organization. So yeah, I'm one person who doesn't care about dressing appropriately. I dress how I feel for that day. So I think we should all do the same. Any other questions at this point in time? We don't see many questions, that tend to be typically how Asians are a little bit. So, but you can always still post the questions to us, feel free to reach out to Tony, myself, Amanda, or Erin at any point in time. Email us. We will share the webinar slides as well as the recording. And I'm sure you have a lot more questions. Maybe some is a little bit more pertinent to what you're doing now and more relevant to what you're doing today, and you wouldn't like to share in a group, then that's fine. So reach out to us. We're happy to chat. We're extremely nice consultants who like to hear and make new friends. And let us know what you think. So we're at the end of the session today, but really appreciate all your time. And thank you to my fellow colleagues in New York. Amanda is in New York as well. Are you?
I am.
We all.
Yeah. So
yeah.
My colleagues are in New York, and it's very late for them. They're exactly 24 hours behind, 12 hours behind us. So thank you. Appreciate your time today to host this wonderful session.
We've enjoyed speaking to you in our near future.
Yep. Thank you, guys. So
Thank
we'll
you
speak
all.
soon. Thank you all. Okay, bye.